actually have a letter at one point that said, unfortunately, Mr. Grandall will never be an officer and an aviator in the United States Army. So that was pretty crushing. Was at that point had switched over, was working at an FBO at a local airport, watching other people get to fly without the opportunity to do it myself, which was probably a good thing because it adds that motivation, right? You get to watch somebody do the thing that you want to do, and it's one of the bases or one of the airports we train at. So I would see Blackhawks and Chinooks come in, and it's like we got to figure out how to make this happen. So take a breath, relax, recage, and go into it. So that was something that I learned pretty early with the racing thing. That being said, I also crashed a lot, so it wasn't super successful in the racing thing. So I learned how to like go limp when you hit a wall. Got hit 160 times in 3 months between IDF and one-way drone attacks. So things completely changed almost instantly.
Malibu, man, thanks for joining me on the podcast. Happy to have you on here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, talk a little Army aviation. It's been underrepresented on the podcast to this point.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for having me. Honor to be here. We've had some pretty amazing guests. Guys have won the DFC and dropped bombs on enemies that were danger close and troops in contact. I'm not really at that level, but I appreciate the opportunity to tell our story and represent the guys that are below the cord.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that. It's been cool talking to a lot of guys. Like, I think obviously everyone has a story to chat about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make an assumption. I think most of these guys would agree that everyone did the same training and the same amount of preparation. They just got thrown into a scenario or situation because they just happened to be on the schedule that day or whatever it might be. That I think, again, most of these guys would say it could have been the guy next to him or the girl next to him or whatever it might be. But it is cool. It is cool to capture these stories, and that's the whole point of doing this. Is it's another form of capturing history that hopefully lives on, hopefully inspires someone. Yada 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 yada, so on and so forth. But yeah, so don't sell yourself short. You're raging around in things that I'm terrified of. You know,
yeah.
5 feet off the ground, and the thing is just violently shaking itself apart. I mean, watching a helicopter crash is rather spicy. A lot of spinning things going on around there.
Yeah, a lot of spinning things. No opportunity to get out like you guys have. So you kind of got to take that into consideration when you're raging. Kind of always have to leave a little bit hanging back because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. 10,000 parts moving, and then the rotor system's a whole different thing. So you start yanking and baking, and things start to decel above you. Can make it a little challenging and end up where you don't want to be. So yeah, you got to keep a little bit back because Blackhawk's supposed to be able to save your life in a lot of situations when you hit the ground, but I never really want to test that.
Yeah, that's one best just to leave it as a note in the dash one or whatever. Like, okay, worst case scenario. It's an impressive helicopter. I mean, that's got to be one of the most proliferated helicopters produced by the U.S. or just period in the world, I would think.
Yeah, I don't know the official stats, but it definitely has an incredible record used by a ton of companies. I'm in the Connecticut Army National Guard, so we have Sikorsky right here. We have a bunch of guys that do both the guard side and then work as production test pilots at Sikorsky, and they're always busy, whether it's with the Air Force's new Whiskey or Seahawks, Naval Hawks, things going to Taiwan, Saudi Arabia, things like that. So it's kind of like the F-16, or what I know about the F-16. There's a lot of different flavors, and you can buy a different package for this or that. But yeah, for helicopters, it's pretty consistent, and it's a great machine. It's one of the few helicopters in the world that's fully aerobatic. Not that the Army lets us take it to those limits, but knowing that if you get into that position, the aircraft will stay together. 1G is 1G. It doesn't care. I don't know if I'd ever try to take a Chinook to those levels. So, you can kind of trust it when you're raging around, and we've done some some things that probably shouldn't repeat on a public forum like this. And the
Yeah, yeah,
aircraft stay together.
yeah, right.
We'll let
Uh,
Muttley tell that story when he comes on.
yeah.
I'll let him get in trouble for it.
I think is it the Robinson like that's like notorious for chopping its tail off. Like if you go negative G, right? I don't know anything about it, but like
Mm-hmm.
if you went slightly less than 1 G, right, there's a chance for that rotor that's going to clip the tail off.
Yeah, it's not even the tail; it's the main mast. So
Oh,
it's a teetering hinge. It's a different type of rotor system without going into the nerdy stuff. But if you negative G, and I actually started flying Robinsons and went to the safety course. But if you negative G, you can have a mast bump, which is basically the rotor hub hits the mast, and you generally only get one of those. You get one clunk. Second clunk is it's going to separate the rotor system from the mast, and now you're just ballistic projectile coming back towards the ground. So not really where we want to be. I remember going to the Robinson safety course, and they basically were saying, "Hey, you've got in an engine failure, especially, you have 1.1 seconds to get the collective full down, or you're going to stall the rotor system and die." So it's like, so I have to watch out for mast bumping. I have to worry about an engine failure killing me in a second. Kind of don't want to be in this helicopter anymore. So I occasionally fly them, but for the most part, as a Blackhawk pilot, I like having a lot of metal around us, redundant systems, a rotor system that doesn't care about low G. But yeah, Robinson's not. If you're if you're gonna start flying helicopters, they're cheap, but it's not the safest helicopter in the world. So don't judge your helicopters from Robinson. No offense to Robinson. Before I
yeah,
get
I'm sure
hate mail.
they're great helicopters. I've flown in them. I guess, but ignorance is bliss when it comes to that fact. So
Yeah,
now that I know all that, I'm like, maybe not. I think we pretty much have summed up the recruiting effort for Army Aviation now. So thanks for joining
yeah,
the podcast. We'll
yeah.
on to the next one. Well,
Appreciate
hey,
it.
tell me a little bit your background. Where'd you grow up, and what kind of led you down the path to Army Aviation?
Yep, grew up in northern Connecticut. Born and raised. Grew up playing hockey and driving small shifter carts or racing cars. Uh, Kind of did that after high school for a couple of years. Got a professional license. Nothing significant to note. I wasn't going to be an IndyCar or a Formula One car or a Formula One driver like I wanted to be, but did it at a fairly high level. Uh,
Is that the path to like IndyCar? And then I know Formula One's probably a whole different level because you're dealing with Europeans and they got their whole system
mhm.
there. But is that your path to racing professionally?
Yep. Yeah, that's generally where people start. Actually, oddly enough, my last ever race was in Las Vegas in 2010, and I was in the pro class, and then there were a bunch of junior classes with younger kids, and I was racing for a French team, so they sent all the Euro guys over, and one of the kids, never really talked to him because I don't think he spoke English at that point, and he was like 11, 12 years old. Uh, is currently racing for Ferrari because he's in Formula One. His name is Charles Leclerc. So he was my teammate. Never talked to him, but that's my complete racing claim to fame is that I was teammates with a 12-year-old that actually did something with his racing career. So, um,
Wow.
yeah, so that was pretty cool. I think it helped me in the long run transitioning into aviation, just being able to interface with the machine, and then in a race car, you're just the whole point is to manage energy and weight transfer, which is really all you're doing when you're max performing an aircraft, um, especially a helicopter because you get a lot of different things going on, like I was talking about, and also just dealing with pressure, right? Sitting on that grid, waiting to race, like that race in Vegas that I brought up. You're with 40 of the best drivers in the world. Don't know how I ended up there. Um, but dealing with that pressure and having to find a way to calm yourself down and go out and do your job, kind of like the same way that stepping to an aircraft, especially in a combat zone, you're like, okay, I gotta center myself, take all that stress, compartmentalize it, and go roll out and do what I got to do. Um, so
How,
did that.
how did you do that at that age? Well, do you have any techniques that you latched onto, or just like brute force get it done?
Uh, it started with brute force, was somewhat unsuccessful, kind of suboptimal. So just started working on that focusing on your breathing and kind of the way that it kind of developed in how I approach check rides as well. Like when you're sitting there ready to race or you're coming up for a check ride, it's all the preparation that got you there, and you're either prepared or you're not. But sitting there waiting to take the start is not the time to fix whether you're prepared or not. You're either prepared or you're not. So whatever happens, happens. So just kind of lock in, take a breath. And then once the flag drops, it went away pretty quickly because you're pretty occupied at that point. Things are happening relatively quickly. So that's generally how I did it, was just like take a breath. And that's how I did it. I do it in the aircraft as well. Everybody has those moments when you're not feeling great or you kind of biff something and you've got to pretty quickly brain dump it and take that breath and like, all right, I'm over controlling or whatever's going on. I need to relax because I'm gripping the cyclic or the collective way too hard because, it's dusty out or whatever the scenario is. So take a breath, relax, recage, and go into it. So that was something that I learned pretty early with the racing thing. That being said, I also crashed a lot, so it wasn't super successful in the racing thing. So I learned how to like go limp when you hit a wall. So that's like maybe hopefully that I don't have to find out if that'll help me with the helicopter. But
yeah.
So yeah, did the racing thing. Like I said, figured out pretty quickly that it wasn't going to be a long-term thing. It does inform how I became Malibu, which will be in the story of how, because it's part of how I had to join Army Aviation. But finished in 2011, and then figured I needed a real job. Kind of grew up around corporate helicopter aviation through my best friend. His dad was a director of maintenance for one of the corporate operators here with corporate helicopters. So that's kind of the aviation that I knew. Always had an interest in aviation. And hey, I'm going to get a real grown-up job instead of trying to be a race car driver. I'm going to go fly helicopters. So made a logical switch, I guess. Fortunately, there was a small helicopter school in the area. So my buddy and I both started at the same time, and then pretty quickly realized this is really expensive.
Yeah.
For what I paid for a private, I probably could have got my instrument commercial fixed wing. So that's an oopsie. But got my private, and as I was getting to that level, the racing stuff, the competitive side from racing was the thing that I missed the most. And I kind of looked around and said, this is fun. I love this, but anybody can do this, right? Anybody with enough money or wants to go get Sally Mae and mortgage your life can be a helicopter pilot in the civilian side. Not that there's not great helicopter pilots there, but I want to do something that pushes the limits. And because I'd gone racing after high school instead of going to college, when I looked around at the military, which is where I identified like, hey, this is going to be where the competitive stuff is. There's the cat.
We'll have to talk about the cat in a little bit later on the deployment. Cat's got a story.
Yeah, cat's got the combat story. Once, I looked at the military and looked around, it was, Air Force, Navy, Marines. Hey, you got to have a degree. Looked into that, like, okay, it's going to take me 4 years. At that point, I was about 23, 24. And I think the Air Force at that point was you had to be in UPRT by 30. So not having any military experience or really knowing anybody in that world, it seemed like a pretty big risk to pop out from school, be 27, 28, and then start cold calling places and trying to rush and get selected before I butted up against that age limitation. So found the Army with the Warrant Officer Program. The Army is the only branch that'll let you fly or go high school to flight school. So walked into a recruiter in August of 2012 and said, hey, I want to be a pilot. I want to go to the WAF program. What do I need to do? Found out pretty quickly, hey, you need laser eye surgery, and there's got to be a 6-month delay after you get it before you can do anything. So go get the surgery and call us in 6 months. So that delayed that from the start. Had to get PRK at the time. I don't think LASIK was an option. So it was a little longer recovery there. And then finished the recovery period, entered the ASVAB, and going back to the racing stuff, towards the end of my racing career, I spent a lot of time in Southern California, specifically Malibu. And almost as a dare joke, because I thought I was going to never need a real job, ended up with knuckle tattoos, which is not genius. So Also, first tattoos too is so it was. It's not like I'm covered in tattoos. The first tattoo was my birth year on my knuckles because somebody else paid for it, and I thought it was. They thought it was funny, and I was
Naturally. At
yeah.
least it wasn't a face tattoo.
Yeah, very, very true. So I like to explain that period of my life as like, that the OODA loop. There wasn't a lot of observe and orientate in my life at that point. It was just deciding and acting. So that kind of bit me in the butt a couple of times. But so I had the knuckle tattoos. At this point, the army was kind of saying was going back and forth on tattoo regulations. Like, and literally within the span of a couple of months ago, you can't have face, neck, knuckle tattoos as long as they're not game related or inappropriate, and then they reverse course. So I take the ASVAB, I get the GT score that I need in order to take the AFAS test at that point. And they're like, "Hey, we're not going to let you take the test because you can't have the tattoos. So get the tattoos removed and then come back and take the test." So started doing laser removal, super painful. Didn't really work that well, so it made my already prison-looking tattoos even more janky looking. Not really where you want to be. Uh, so was doing that, was selling cars at that point. Wasn't flying anymore because I didn't really have the money to do that. I was trying to save up to continue. So I had my private rotorcraft in about 60 hours. And that was the extent of my aviation experience at that point. And after a couple of months of getting these laser removals, didn't really work, but I got a call one day from the recruiter and like, "Hey, they changed the regulation. We can get you a waiver. You want to do it still?" Yep, absolutely. So they scheduled me for the AFAS test. I show up at MEPS in Westover Air Force Base, and the proctor is like, "You're here for the SIFT." I'm like, "What's the SIFT?" And
Yeah,
he's like,
what is the SIFT?
yeah, so the SIFT is now the new selection instrument for flight training for the Army. So it's a new flight selection test. The FAST test was the old test, and I hit it right at the crossover point. So
Yeah, I guess break down that acronym too for FAST. This is Army acronyms and or just acronyms in general.
that one I actually don't
Fair
know
enough.
if I know. It's the AFAST. It's the Army Flight Aptitude Selection Test. If I had to guess, but that could be
It's
completely wrong.
it's a computer based test.
Yep, it's just
Okay.
kind of
Yeah.
it's kind of like an amalgam of the AFLQT.
Okay.
So I show up and they're like, it's the test that you have to get in order to go to flight school. It's like one of those barriers you have to cross. So I show up and he's like, "Hey, you're here for the SIF test." And I'm like, "What's that?" And he's like, "It's new the Army flight test." I'm like, "Well, I studied for the FAST. Can I take that?" And he's like, "Nope." And he goes,
Nice.
"Oh, by the way, you're also the first one at this MEP station to take it." So I take the test. He knew what I needed to pass, so I get my grade. I passed. It did. Looking back, it did okay. But I get the grade, and I'm like, "Is that a good score?" Because I'm trying to go to active duty, and it's heavily weighted there. And he goes, "I don't know. You're the first one to take it." So, and it's like, okay, great. We're off to a
Awesome.
good start.
Awesome.
Yep. So I get the results, and the next step is having to go to West Point to get my Class 1A flight physical. Class 1A for the Army is way more stringent before you fly than it is
Yeah.
after. Like literally that first time you fly in flight school, and now you could basically be blind as long as it's correctable. But before you go in, you have to be, basically an eagle. So go to West Point. Everything's good until I get to the optometrist. This major looks at me for about 5 minutes, and he goes, "You've got this disease." He explains it to me like I'm a peer, which looking back, he was basically claiming that I had a disease called ectasia, which is my cornea was too thin and it would require a corneal transplant in order to fix. Like, should have never done the surgery if that was true. Nobody had ever seen it. Looked at me for 5 minutes and then went on this diatribe how I'm not going to be an aviator. And sorry, thanks for playing. See you later. So, kind of defeated, crushed, driving home with the recruiter because you're not allowed to drive there by yourself. So I'm older. I'm like 25, 26. So I'm trying to process this information. And this was kind of the moment, and it's kind of the story of my career. The only special skill that I have is I'm too stupid to quit when I want something. So kind of had to recage and either accept this or I don't. Decided not to, and then proceeded to try to find as many second opinions as humanly possible. From civilian flight docs that were retired Navy. One of them was a retired Navy flight doc. He wrote me a letter of recommendation, looked at me, hey, I don't see anything. And then through happenstance found, or got a contact with a doctor at Yale who was like the preeminent specialist on laser eye surgery and corneal disease. So got an appointment with him. He looked at me and basically was like, I have no idea what they're talking about. Here's the limit. Here's what they're claiming. Here's where you actually are. You're well within the healthy standard. Like, and he also didn't tell you to find, like, this is a pretty serious disease. I don't know if he explained that to you, but he should have either offered you treatment or told you to seek treatment if he actually thought you had this. So he wrote me a pretty strongly worded letter to send to them, to West Point. So I thought I had a chance at that point. Would go into the recruiter, hey, can you fax this to West Point? And we kept getting like, there's no retesting. Sorry. So it was like, okay, kept getting more letters, kept badgering them. It ended up being, I'd go into the recruiter every other day. I know that they probably were really sick of me, and say, hey, you need to fax this to West Point. So after about a month and a half, and this is about a year and a half after I first walked into a recruiter's office, they finally responded, all right, here's your date. Don't call us again. Like, just leave us alone.
Right.
But you can show up, and this was late October, I think, in 2013. So went back down, saw the same doctor, looked at my paperwork, looked at the letters of recommendation, looked at me again, and I'm waiting for this fight. But now I kind of know what I'm talking about because I've had so much time to figure out what I was accused of having, which I didn't have. Looked at me again for 5 minutes. It was like, oh, it looks like it got better. And it's like, it doesn't get better. I would have had to have a corneal transplant. But as long as you sign the paperwork, I don't care what your assessment is. And then actually saw the flight surgeon. The flight surgeon was one of the few flight surgeons in the Army that was both an aviator and a flight surgeon. And he actually, to his credit, was like, hey, sorry about that. Congratulations. You're able to go to the next step, which is to the flight board. That was a pretty quick transition. That was about a week later, went up, sat in front of 3 officers with no military experience either. So they stand you there and they're like, hey, this is how you check in to the president of the board. And you're like, I don't know how to do any of this. I got to knock on the door a certain way and then come in and salute and candidate reporting to the president of the board. And
is this like, at West Point? This is active duty guys. You're standing in front of the board.
Yep. It's active duty. It wasn't at West Point. It was up in Albany. It was just where the brigade that they wanted me to board with was.
And I'm sorry, aviation specific, because you're going down the aviation path, so you're having to meet with aviation brigade.
The Army only requires one aviator to be on the board, and that is, or at least they did at the time. It's been a while, and that's not necessarily mandatory. They can waive that. So my board didn't have a single aviator on it. So I had a mixture of a lieutenant colonel, and I'm not 100% sure if they even told me what their MOS was, but I didn't see any flight wings and no flight uniforms. So I don't believe any of them were aviators. And then you just sit down, and none of the questions they asked were aviation specific. It was more leadership, and can you go out and, as a leader, send people out to go do things that you know that they may not come home from if you believe it's the right thing to do, those kind of questions. So did that, went fairly well. There was other officer candidates there for regular officer O grade, but they weren't going aviation. And before we went in, I was the only one going for the Warrant Officer Flight Program, WAFT. They said, the officer guys, you will know, guys and girls, you will know before you leave here whether you're selected and you're going to OCS. WAF guys, we will tell you whether we recommend you, but it has to go to the G1 at the Pentagon and be approved before it's actually official. So that could take a couple of weeks. So I knew when I left that they recommended me for selection. I didn't know if I actually had the selection. And it's usually a pretty good indication from what I understand, they don't usually go against the recommendation of the board unless there's something heinous in your background that they haven't seen up until that point. But it's still, for me, it took 2 months for them to actually tell me that they were going to select me.
Do you know why that is? Like the difference between a warrant officer taking 2 months to be selected versus like an officer getting noticed that day? Is it? I assume it's legality in Congress or something like that. Some weird obscure thing.
It's got to be something like that. And if I had to guess, knowing how things at Fort Rucker work, it probably needs to be approved at Fort Rucker. Like our flight physicals, every year we do them, obviously here in the state. They get signed by our flight surgeon, but they still have to go to Fort Rucker to be fully approved. So they have to double check everything because they are the home of Army aviation. So if I had to guess, and it would be completely a guess, it probably has to do with some colonel or flag officer at Fort Rucker has to approve the active duty selections or something like that. So it was.
So your normal like annual physical is not good, like I guess officially until Fort Rucker signs off on it.
Yep.
Interesting.
And it's backed up. So I just had to renew my flight physical, and our flight surgeon was saying they haven't actually signed any of those in like 2 years. So they just we've got a backseater in the 47 community, and this is all through him, and I probably am messing up the story. He was like, he's been flying because he got approved, and then his flight physical is 2992, just went through Fort Rucker, and they disapproved it, but he already has like 150 hours of flying time because it was approved for him to fly here, but Fort Rucker found something in his medical record that they didn't like, and that we have to retest him for. And it's like, this is like inefficiency at its peak. Like,
yeah, you know what? I'm going to give the Air Force a pat on the back on this one because at least, once you do your flight physical every year with your flight doc on base, you're good to go, right? Unless it required something further and you're not flying while you deal with waivers or whatever it is, so.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it doesn't usually affect us because I had no idea that my flight physical wasn't actually approved. It was approved enough for me to go rage out in the 60, but I guess it's the legality thing, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, so a couple of months later, finally got the word that I was selected for active duty WAFT. So that program, for those that are unfamiliar, it's a guaranteed contract to go to flight school and become a warrant officer. So you go to basic training, provided you pass that, then you immediately go to WOCS. And then the follow-on things, the warrant officer basic course, which is just a basic officer aviation course. And then at the time, Dunker, which is no longer required at flight school. And then SEER. And then after getting beat up, then you finally get to go fly a helicopter, and now you're in flight school. So
the Dunker is the water one where they put you in the thing and flip you upside down and you got to find your way out.
Yeah, the one where they actually could potentially kill you.
Wasn't there was a couple things popping up. Didn't someone get seriously injured or die? Maybe not.
It's possible. Like I would rather, and as you know, SEER wasn't fun. I would probably rather do SEER again than do Dunker a bunch. When I did Dunker, it dawned on me that the rescue swimmer doesn't have oxygen. So he's standing behind this fake glare shield, and he's like, "You ready?" And I was like, "Not really." And he goes, "Why?" And I'm like, "This is exactly what they tell you not to do in water. You're going to flip me upside down in the dark and lock me in a box, and you don't have any oxygen. So you're going to let me drown. Yeah, you'll get me out, but you're going to let me drown, and then you're going to revive me afterwards. This sounds awful. Like, I don't really want to do this." So I joined the Army, not the Navy. Like, if I wanted to be over water, I would have gone to the Navy. I'll take the desert any day.
Oh.
So, yeah, so got selected to the WAF program, and then it was a delayed enlistment. So I swore in January timeframe of 2014, and then I wasn't supposed to ship to basic training until July. And they were just like, kind of hang out. I think there was this program called the Future Soldier Program, which means that you had to show up every couple of months just so that you could confirm that you were alive and you didn't do anything drastic like get knuckle tattoos, like I already had and had a waiver for. So was just kind of living life, was super excited. at that time, the Army commitment was 6 years after graduating flight school. So it would have worked out, depending on how long it took me to go through the pipeline, to be 8 to 9 years of my life on active duty. So everything was gravy, right? I kind of just finished out my time. And this is when I kind of shot myself in the foot and just bad timing. That spring, I got a normal speeding ticket, like nothing egregious, speeding ticket. And the recruiters had said, hey, if anything changes, you need to let us know. It's not a big deal. We just need to make sure that your packet's up, because it's worse, right, if they find it later.
Yep.
And you try to hide things. So I get this speeding ticket, nothing crazy. It was like $150 fine, paid it, gave it to the recruiter. Well, this is 2014, so this was during the sequester. What I didn't realize was, one, I didn't actually have to, because it wasn't at the right level. It had to be over $300 for me to have to tell the Army about it. And because it was a sequester, they were looking for reasons to reduce the budget and to withdraw slots. So the recruiter pushed it up, and they ended up 4 days before I was supposed to ship, actually on my birthday. The recruiter texted me. It was like, hey, the Army just withdrew your slot. You're not going to flight school anymore. And was 4 days away from going to active duty. So I had no job at that point. I was spending time at home because I had given up my apartment. Like, there was nothing really for me to do because I was expecting to leave. So huge crushing blow. And they were like, oh, by the way, but if you still want to ship on the 15th, you can join the infantry and then go to flight school down the road. It's like, that sounds awful. No, I'm not going to do that. Sorry. It's an important job, but not for me. Like, yep. You don't want me in a foxhole. Not where I want to be. So again, too stupid to give up. Used the last $4,000 I had to hire a military attorney, and that took about 3 months, and it went all the way up to the G1 in the Pentagon. And every step of the way, it was, we don't know why his slot was taken, but there's nothing we can do, until finally the G1 said the same thing, and that was the be all end all. And it looked like, well, he's not going to be an Army aviator anymore. Actually have a letter at one point that said, unfortunately, Mr. Grandall will never be an officer and an aviator in the United States Army. So that was pretty crushing. Was at that point had switched over. Was working at an FBO at a local airport, watching other people get to fly without the opportunity to do it myself, which was probably a good thing, because it adds that motivation, right? You get to watch somebody do the thing that you want to do, and it's one of the bases or one of the airports we train at. So I would see Blackhawks and Chinooks come in, and it's like, we got to figure out how to make this happen. So just through some random circumstances, got in touch with the Guard. The Guard can, but generally doesn't, send people street to seat. They require you to be in the National Guard first, before you can flight board and then go to flight school. Same flight training. If people aren't familiar, every Army aviator is trained at Fort Rucker now. It's been that way since, I think, the 70s, since they got rid of Fort Walters. So everybody goes to the same place, right? It's the home of Army Aviation, and it's actually, I think, called Fort Novacell now. They changed the name. It was one of those bases. But it doesn't matter whether you're Guard, active duty, you're all going to the same place, getting the same training. So I was talking with a National Guard recruiter, and he was explaining, you have to be in the Guard first. And I was like, well, does it matter that I was selected by active duty? Packet's already done. I have all these things. I'm already a rated helicopter pilot. I was like, well, that will help you with the board, but you still have to be in the Guard. So you have to decide if you want to do this. So I decided it's my last shot. I'm going to take the risk. Enlisted in the National Guard. And they told me that the next flight board would be in January of the next year. So I had to be home before that. So they told me to choose an aviation job that got me home before January. This was January of the year before. So I take hydraulic repair, which is down at Fort Rucker. It was like a 12-week AIT, which is advanced individual training, part of your basic training. Go to basic training, go to Fort Rucker. I'm there as a private now. At the same time, I should have been there as a warrant officer. So I'm a little salty. I'm at Fort Rucker for 2 weeks, and thank God my recruiter remembered. He's actually my neighbor now, which was just an accident. But that
Small
was
world.
just good.
Yeah.
Yeah, really small world. But he sent me the memo for the flight board as a private while I was still in initial training that said they were going to do the flight board a week before I graduated in October, and had another major meltdown and
Dude.
was like, uh, like I'm about to do a job I don't want to do. I joined the guard. I'm going to miss this flight board and hope to get to it next year. So again, go back to too stupid to give up. Started cold calling people because I didn't know anybody in the National Guard. I just took this risk, right? Um, and it was kind of all informed by this mentor that I had. That's a former Vietnam Huey pilot that I'm still in contact with, and he basically, when I was still figuring out my stuff, gave me the best advice I've ever heard, which was like, you want to do all these things, but you're not in a position to call the shots. So you have to go do whatever you have to do to put yourself in a position to call the shots. So I was kind of remembering his words, started cold calling people like, this is private Grandall. I'm in training. Am I allowed to apply for this flight board? And pretty much everybody was like, we appreciate what you're trying to do. Not your year, including the warrant officer strength managers, it was his job. He was the warrant officer recruiter, and it was his job to help me build the packet. So he was like, not your year, kid. Sorry. Um, Fortunately, I already had that packet done, and I'm at the home of Army Aviation, and I had a really good platoon sergeant, who I explained what I was trying to do. And my goal was like, if I can convince them to let me uh, virtually board, kind of like this, maybe I have a shot, because I didn't expect them to change the date for the board. And it was literally a week before I graduated. So it's like, it's so close, but not there. Flight physical had expired. So with the platoon sergeant's help, we weren't supposed to leave class because we were still in initial training, and in the Army you're not a human being yet, right? Even though I was 25 at that point or something, I'm not a human being.
Yeah.
I can't walk anywhere by myself. I need a battle buddy. like like I can't have my phone on me. So the only time I was allowed to have my phone was at lunch. So I would skip lunch, go back to my room, and then make all the calls and do whatever I needed on my phone in those 45 minutes, and then go back to class. And the platoon sergeant also allowed me to, basically was like, if you tell anybody, I'm going to hurt you, but I will let you leave class and go straight to the medical clinic. And then you come back. You're not allowed to do any of the things you're not allowed to do, like go to Starbucks, because apparently that you're not allowed to do that either, because you're not a human being. Um, but I was able to renew my flight physical, rebuilt my packet, had to write a memo. So they helped me write the memo in the way that the Army wanted me to do it. And then called the president of the board, who was a CW5. I had no idea who he was, and basically begged him to look at my packet. And he gave me the same answer, like, it's not your year. And I think just to get me off the phone, he was like, just send me your stuff and no promises. So I sent him my packet, and a couple days later, I came back to my room to a voicemail that said, we're going to push the board until you get home so that we can board you when you get home. No promises again, but obviously at that point, like, there was still work to do, but that was a huge relief because now I got a shot. And if they're willing to push it, there was probably a reason. So I was feeling pretty confident at that point. Graduated from that course that I didn't want to do, Distinguished Honor Grad. The National Guard liaison came up, gave me a coin. He was like, if there's anything I can do for you, it's like, it's funny you say that, sir. I'm about to flight board. Can you write me a letter of recommendation? Yeah, sure. So he reached out to the state, and then 3 days later came back home, boarded, and then 2 weeks later they told me that I was selected. And this time I actually shipped a couple of months later to Warrant Officer Candidate School, went through flight school, and walked across the stage almost 5 years after first walking into the recruiter to get my silver wing. So really long story, but kind of, for, as you said, if there's people out there listening and trying to get into flight school, whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, if you believe that you belong there and you're willing to do the work, don't let anybody tell you no. There's always a waiver for everything. There's always somebody that's there that's willing to help you out and help you get there. So
Yeah,
long
I think
story.
that'll definitely resonate with a lot of people because again, I get that question quite often, quite frequently, whether it be about waivers or getting told no. I don't obviously know the Army Guard and Reserves process you alluded
Hmm.
to a little bit. I'll throw out there bogey dope. I'm not getting paid by bogey dope. I
Yep.
do have an affiliate link I need to throw down there, but that's I think a great resource for people to use. And they're trying to
Hmm.
expand. Like it started off obviously really good with Air Force side, Guard Reserve, how to rush it. And there's a lot of resources that I don't know. I've never had to go through that process. I just like hear these stories and like it's not
Yeah.
always clean cut. And if you got a clean cut entry, like you won the lottery, like
Oh,
and
100%.
and go get a lottery ticket because you're probably going
Yeah.
to win. So,
Hell yeah.
dude, your story is probably the longest story I've heard of. And the as
Sorry.
many no, in a way of like getting to
Yeah.
the finish line, like it's a testament of not quitting, which is pretty cool. So, and
Yep.
look at you now. You know,
Yeah. Look at me now. Field grade instructor pilot. I think I just slipped through the right crack, right? It's not about being the best, it's being in the right place, right time, right uniform. That's why I'm wearing the Air Force shirt and the Afterburn.
yeah. So better
So
lucky than good. That's what I say. You know.
yep.
So,
Yep.
uh,
100%.
how was flight school? Because you flew a couple different helicopters, or what? Tell me about Army flight school. What is that construct for the Helo pipeline?
So it's changed a little bit since I went through specifically with the training aircraft. But when I went through, we flew a version of the Bell 206 Jet Ranger, which we called the TH-67. I think up until recently, or maybe still, the Air Force used the same, or the Navy used the same platform. It was just a different designation. Um, but really basic, single engine turbine, skidded helicopter, analog gauges. We did have a Garmin GPS in there. And you go through contact, instrument, with, and each one is about 2 months long with different instructors. And then you would go into the OH-58, which was the Vietnam combat version of the 206 Jet Ranger, and you would do your basic warfighting skills. So that's where you're flying low level, you're using Australian fold maps and trying to navigate off of that in lower Alabama where there's no terrain. So you're getting lost almost immediately. Even though you're only doing 80, 90 knots. I remember.
All the trees look the same.
Yep. And for anybody that's actually in Army Flight School, I don't know if they're allowed to use the GPS now in the Lakota for BWS, but pro tip is in the South, all the water towers have the name of the town on them, so that can help you out really well. You just kind of get a little closer to the water tower, and it's like, we're here. Because that was like the first thing that my instructor asked me on the first day in BWS. You have the map, he's flying. He's like, where do you think you are? And you point, I think we're here. And he's like, no, we passed that like 5 minutes ago. So I have no idea where we are. Cool. I was like, we'll
Neat.
figure it out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sweet trees.
Yep. So yeah, you start in the 206 Jet Ranger, and just contact. So you're basically flying up. There's all these satellite stage fields around Fort Rucker, which are just a bunch of really short runways, all in a line. And you just got all these little bumblebees circling, and you're doing basic things like just normal approaches, hover work. Back then, we did a ton of auto rotations to the ground, which they no longer do in the Lakota. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, you're flying nonstop at least 2-3 hours a day, every day during the week, and then you graduate to instruments, do that for 2 months, and then, like I said, BWS, and then there's a short break. You select, or National Guard, you already generally know what you're getting, and then you go into your go to war airframe. I went through at a time when there was both the legacy Blackhawk and the modern Mike model. So I went actually through the legacy Blackhawk course, which is slightly shorter, and then later on had to do a transition. But now I think everybody is going straight to the mic, and all said and done, it's about a year of your life that you're in flight school. Could be a little bit more, could be a little less. I think the Apache course is like double what the Blackhawk course is because they have to go shoot weapons and do all that gun game stuff. But it was great. The Army has since transitioned to the Lakota, which is a twin engine, fully digital, fully automated Airbus. And the hand flying, the basic airmanship that we're seeing coming out of flight school as a general rule, obviously there's exceptions, is a little bit lower to begin with because you're not getting those reps in instruments in the 206 or in the 50 TH67. I didn't have an autopilot, so if I needed to do something where it required two hands, I had to tell my instructor, who was 72 years old, a 72-year-old Vietnam vet, that he was my autopilot and what to do. And the aircraft wasn't always where I left it when I look back. Not because he was messing with me, because he got distracted or he was looking at something else, and we're like 300 feet off and heading on the wrong course. And it's like, Rod, I thought you were my autopilot. It's like, well, sometimes autopilots mess up.
You should be paying attention. Yeah.
Yeah. So just that basic, we call it BI, basic instrument, holding altitude and changing the attitude of the aircraft and all those things, it seemed to degrade a little bit. So Army flight school, what it is now, I can't really give you too much information. I know that in the Blackhawk course, they no longer do auto rotations. They demo one, and then these guys come back from flight school, and now it is my job as an instructor to take them around in a pattern and do auto rotation after auto rotation after auto rotation because they've never done it before, right? I don't know why those things were changed. It's probably budgetary, and that's well above my head and pay grade. But it's in some ways it's disappointing.
Yeah.
We as some of your A10 guests have said, you can't jam a map. We spent a lot of time on maps in basic warfighting skills, and now we got guys that can't really read sectionals when they first come out and terrain associate. So learning those skills is now, it seems like it's been pushed less on flight school and more on the unit when you get home. And we do a lot of base training first before we can get somebody ready to go into mission training.
Is flight school shorter, or are they putting more people through? I just say because from the Air Force side, where they've cut things out of the syllabus and syllabi, if you will, it's usually a direct result of trying to pump more bodies through. Maybe there's an issue with iron, and they're trying to keep to a timeline. Like for a period of time, guys were showing up and they had never been to the tanker. And that was one where I talked about the Messer mishap. Guy had never been to the tanker, and then his first time doing it at a CAF unit, the Combat Air Force, which those instructor pilots, they're not teaching the basics of how to go to the tanker the first time, which is a significant emotional event. So I wonder if it's probably tied to a combination of budget, pipeline, all sorts of things. But
yeah, I mean, we call it in the Army too that it always could be the good idea fairy. Somebody looking for an OER bullet point. I know that's a little jaded to think that way, but I mean, I can't imagine in the single seat world, you're getting these guys and you're having to train them and you're not even in the same jet, right? That's completely crazy to us because I'm at least sitting next to the person and I can help out, and I'm heavily invested in that aircraft, not getting dinged because I signed for it. Yep. So I can't imagine the challenge of having to instruct somebody that's relatively new and you're not even in the aircraft. That's pretty crazy to us.
Be a champion. Yeah, there's
pretty impressive.
There's no plan B. Fun fact: I did get to fly to Lakota. I got to go down to Fort Polk and do that. So I use that term. I use that term very loosely. Fly, right? Like I have no idea what's going on. I was like, I want to slow down, so I'm pulling back on. I guess is that the collective? So and then
left hand, collective.
Yeah, we're climbing. Like that's not what I want to do. I want to go. I want to go down. It's very counterintuitive to me.
Enjoy it at all?
Yeah, it was awesome. It was a great experience. Bunch of. One Fort Polk or whatever the Army calls it these days. Great location. I can see why everyone really likes going there. Yeah. But we had we took maybe 6 planes down to Alexandria. Then they flew over, picked us up, and went back over a bunch of CW4s and CW5s, just salty guys who they were all real salty about getting rid of the Blackhawk. They're like this, what was one Blackhawk now takes us like 4 of these or whatever the equivalent was, but obviously tons of experience and probably have forgotten more about aviation than I have ever known. So it was a cool experience to go down there and do that for a day for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the W5s, we call them the lightsabers. They're the legitimate subject matter experts. I'm sure we'll get into it, but I had my AMSO, which is Aviation Mission Survivability Officer. It's the Army's version of a weapons officer, nowhere near as prestigious, nowhere near as well trained. But that's what we are. My battalion AMSO was from the Illinois Guard, W5. we called him Spicy. He didn't have a call sign, but his last name was McCormick, so we came up with Spicy. I don't know if he enjoyed that or not. Really gruff looking dude. I was terrified of him when I first landed because I thought he was going to be a total hard ass, but he ended up being a great dude. But same thing, like I don't think there was a single thing that I ever asked him. One, that he didn't tell me he didn't have time for, and two, didn't either find the answer or already know it. It was like those W5s, those lightsabers, they carry a lot of weight. And you see even guys with eagles on their chest that colonels that they're going to be quiet when the W5 starts talking because they know that guy's got 30 years of Army aviation experience. It's a pretty cool thing to watch.
Yeah, I think, man, if there's some way the Air Force could figure out, which we have warrant officers now, but not flying. I think that's a whole different thing. But guys first, like, man, I just want to fly, right? Like, I want to be a tactician. I just want to do my job and be the best at it. Because unfortunately, the Air Force, like, you're just going to keep up or out type mentality for the most part. Versus the Army, it's like, dude, you're a warrant officer. Like, you're going to live in the aviation unit your entire career, and this is all you're going to do, and you're going to be the subject matter expert. Like, that's pretty awesome. And you're not doing all the other random BS and stuff that pops up as you move up the chain. So that's cool.
Wasn't the Air Force trying to do like this one track where you were like not leadership track, but flying track?
They tried it in Air Mobility Command. I would love to talk to I think it might have been, it was only like, call it 2 to 10. Something like, it was a very small number. They're like, and this was as I was getting out active duty, like, hey, look, we're going to put you on this track. You're going to be fly only. And you'll top out at 05, but all you're going to do, like, you're just going to fly. Life is going to be great. It's everything you asked for. I would love to find those people and see how it worked out, because I guarantee it's like, oh, sweet, you're not on a command track. We have this 365 to Afghanistan, and since you're not on a game plan, we need you to go fill this random, 1 year remote assignment doing something that's been vacant. I mean, I watched it, and I've talked about it on the podcast. We had guys. And I mean, one of the catalysts for me to decide to depart active duty, I remember we had an 05 show up at my squadron. He had been selected on the Air Education Training Command list as well as the Air Combat Command list. So he had been screened for command and eligible for command in either of those two commands, right? So lots off. But he shows up to Shaw. He's not on anyone's game plan, as they're moving the chess pieces around, the bobs, that I don't know how it works, right? But he's not on anyone's plan. He shows up from staff. He's got to get requalified. He's not an instructor pilot, although they're putting him back into the instructor pilot upgrade program. Well, like a 365 gets thrown to Shaw, and it's like, well, got to fill it. And at this time period, it was, to work for an Army 06 in Kabul. The position had been vacant for 18 months, just to let you know how important this position was. They're like,
yeah, super important.
Yeah, we got to play nice, so we're going to send him. The dude, I mean, long story medium. I mean, he spent like the last 3.5 years of his active duty career not flying the Viper because, it wasn't on anyone's command list. So I just say that, like, dude, if you're I hope it worked out for those guys. I hope they all retired as 05s and everything. They flew the jet and life was great. I'm like, man, if you're not in the game, like, you're not shielded from all the bad deals. And if you're going to send the guy you're grooming to be a squadron commander one day, or are you going to send the guy that he just wants to fly and I can spare him? Like, who are they going to pick? Like, you're going to get the bad deal, man, who's not doing so. The Air Force isn't mentioned anymore. And I actually had someone send me a message this morning asking if I went to the Air Force, AFA, Air Force Association conference. Man, I should know that. Every September up in DC, 3 or 4 days, all industry, Air Force. I mean, people are just flowing in. All the generals are talking. Secretary of the Air Force is talking, letting, like, hey, what's going on? I mean, the Air Force, like, I can't even keep up with, like, the amount of changes that are going on right now. And I mentioned in one of my newsletter podcasts, like, they're changing the command structures. We're getting rid of group commanders, which that used to be the 06 right above the flying squadrons.
Okay.
We have, like, task forces deploying entire wings together. Like, all these things are, like, rapidly changing. They're like, trying to get ready for the near peer threat, the Pacific, and how to fight there, or we don't have manning, whatever it might be. But I need, like, a whole series and someone smart enough to interview to talk about, like, what is going on in the Air Force, because it is changing rapidly right now. So.
Yeah, I mean, I saw, and I in the same way you don't speak Army, I don't really speak Air Force. But when I was in Jordan working closely with the Pedro guys, and as I said in my bio, they basically adopted me like a stray cat, and they're
Yeah.
actually the reason that the cat is here because they are the ones that helped me do crime and get him home. Um, but uh, they just going to their alert briefs every day and becoming a fly on the wall, just seeing the changes that they were trying to react to in that, what is it called, agile employment kind
Yeah.
of thing.
The ACE. Yeah. Agile combat
Yeah,
employment. Yep.
yeah, that was like, oh, I'm glad that the Army's doctrine hasn't changed significantly since Vietnam, so
Yeah.
I can take my time to learn it because it'll change, but slowly and piece by piece. And it seems like you guys are going through a pretty rapid uh, evolution at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I mean, one of the gripes I always had. I mean, the military, it's a big bureaucracy. There's lots of
Hmm.
moving parts to get any kind of change. It takes a lot of inertia. So I will say, it's pretty interesting and maybe refreshing to see that the ability to change, whether it's the right changes, like TBD, right?
Hmm.
But make a change, assess, adjust, course correct. Like at least like changes are making
Yeah.
and happening. But from like, yeah, like the agile combat employment, all these changes that are going on with major commands and bases and stuff, like it's it's kind
Yeah.
of it's a whirlwind and big one. The big open source one from a year ago, like with the F-15s leaving Kadena, like that was
Hmm.
almost like overnight. Now I know obviously the decision is being made in vaults and stuff like that and talked about well beforehand, but it was like, hey, yeah, you guys are out of
Hmm.
here, and then we're gonna backfill with random stuff. Like these are just big movements that haven't occurred in the
Yeah.
last 40 years, more or less. So
Well, it seems like every day, just poking around, the Air Force also is changing order amounts for some of their procurement, whether it's the F-15EX or the HX-60 whiskey. Like, hey, we were going to buy this many, and now, just kidding, we're going to buy this many. No, just kidding, we're going to. It's like, all right, are you guys just trying to like test the waters and see where you're going to end up, kind of thing?
I wonder. Again, it was right when I was getting out. Had a meeting, and that's when I first heard that, oh yeah, we're buying the F-15EX. And that was from the General Holmes 4-star. I was like,
Hmm.
what? What is the 15EX? I never even heard of that, right? And then like within 18 months, the test center is getting F-15EXs. You're like, that hasn't happened that fast in quite a while.
Yeah.
Talking to Shiner, who is a H-860, he's a squadron commander now. It's like, yeah, what's up with
Hmm.
the whiskey? When I was a casual lieutenant back in 2007, waiting to go to pilot training, I was at the 41st Rescue Squadron down in Moody, and they're like, yep, any day now, they're going to pick the next rescue vehicle, right? And then like fast
Hmm.
forward, like 2021, 2022, then the whiskey is showing up, and it's going to be
Yeah.
125, and then nope, just kidding, we're going to cut that to 80. I think a lot of
Hmm.
that changed with like threat environment, like
Yeah.
maybe NA, based
Yeah.
upon that. But all the other stuff is like, I don't know. Are we throwing Boeing a bone and trying to get them some money because we're giving Lockheed money for the F-35, keeping 2 defense contractors, or we don't know. I mean, dude,
Yeah.
spider web upon spider
Yep.
web upon spider web is being thrown down. Like, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, we've got the similar thing with the Flara with the V280 Valor being selected over the Sikorsky Defiant, and that's going to be, if and when that thing shows up, that's going to be a seismic change in Army aviation. And it'll be interesting to see how the organization adapts because it's a completely different way of flying, right? We're the only branch that doesn't get any fixed wing training in flight school unless you're fixed wing for life to go fly C-12s or UC-35s. Um, so you've got now this tilter rotor that can do 300 knots and flies like an airplane when the prop rotors are pointed forward. None of us are coming in with any experience for that other than the guys that fly civilian, but none of that counts for the military world. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Army adapts to that. And our big thing um, in our unit from our talks is the Army keeps saying, "Hey, we're going to replace the Blackhawk with this airframe." And it's like, no, you're not. It's a completely different airframe, and if you try to shove it in that Blackhawk box, it's going to be a failure, or it's not going to do the
Yeah.
things that you want. It's got better capabilities in other ways, and you need to exploit those and maximize those and trying to force it to stick in the Blackhawk box because Blackhawk has a role. It's probably going to be behind the flot now because in that near peer fight, You're not going to be getting a lot of UH-60 Army Blackhawks over the FLOT to go do conventional air assaults, at least until you guys punch a hole for us, and hopefully that hole stays open and that IAD's long enough for us to go in there.
It's
But
gonna be fine. Everyone's gonna be fine.
yeah,
Everyone's coming home. It's gonna be
yeah,
great.
yeah, it's gonna be fantastic.
That well, didn't they got awarded it, and then did it just get challenged?
They got challenged, but it was upheld. So
Okay.
Sikorsky challenged it, and the last I saw, and I'm certainly not a subject matter expert, um, is Bell got permission to start prototype production, and they're expecting it to fly as a prototype. They're expecting, I think, 6 airframes to fly in 2026. So it's supposed to be relatively quick, but we all know how that works. Just to give everybody a background, this modern Blackhawk we have, the Mike model, um, fully digital, right? We have GPS. Our legacy aircraft had GPS. The aircraft was basically full rate production and IO passed IOC in 2007. We just this last year in 2023 just got an IFR certified GPS. It took 15 years plus for them to write a line of code so that our GPS could be certified for IFR flight in the United States. So the Army's procurement process isn't always
Yeah.
the smoothest and most streamlined. So it remains to be seen how long it'll take for the Valor to be, or whatever they end up calling it, to be out in the regular Army and not with XPs or the 160th or things like that.
Yeah, I wonder how much the procurement process is changing. Paco probably can speak better. I know he can speak more educated on this than I can. Because the one example I go to is I remember when the F-35 was showing up at Nellis. It hadn't even shown up yet. And the weapons officers they were, hey, you're going to stand up the weapons school for the F-35, talking about the contract. So the time sniper and lightning pods for the targeting pod was across the fleet in the F-16. But when the contract was written for the F-35 for their ETOTs, or I think that's what you call it, basically their sniper pod or their pod on the nose of the jet, like those were written in like 2002 days, right? So that's what was in the contract. And he's like, it won't be, and this is 2013. He's like, it won't be re-upped until the next like revision or however you call it in 2014 or 2015. And like it just takes you like, why? Like we know technology is rapidly changing. Can we not like put an asterisk there of like we're within these bounds and we can renegotiate? I don't know. It's crazy. So I mean, hopefully it's getting better, but
yeah,
I mean, it wouldn't be a podcast unless I bashed on Boeing and talk about the KC-46. We're like, again, this plane's been around for 30 years and it's been in a tanker format, but it takes 20 years. Not all their fault with like the challenges and stuff, but you're like, challenge the contract. Like, come on, this is not good.
Yeah, not to pile on, Boeing seems to not just be dropping the KC-46.
Yeah, they've had a rough go.
Yeah, they got a lot of balls in the air at the moment.
Yeah, but the F-15EX, they did get that out the gate, and just talked to someone who flew. It's like it's a pretty impressive plane. And they figured out how to put the switches up front, so you don't have to have a Wizzo in the back.
Nice. That's impressive.
Yeah, you can have a Wizzo, but you don't have to. So. Not that I'm hating on Wizzos. Love you guys. But yeah, I think, at least they got the F-15EX figured out. So, all right.
Yeah.
We digress down that rabbit hole, but you get back. Talk to me a little bit about being in the Guard unit. What's the tempo like? What's the training profile like? What's a day in and day out like in the Guard in the Army?
Yeah, in the Guard. So I think right off the rip, that whole recruiting poster of, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year as an aviator in the Army is a complete lie. We have these same flight requirements and minimums as active duty. So it is impossible to hit your minimums and do all of the academic training and everything that you need to do just going to drill and an AT. So generally you have to go in at least once a week, if not more, to hit your minimums, do your progression. So you come out of flight school is what we call RL3, so readiness level 3. Means you're basically only qualified to fly with an instructor pilot and do base tests. Like I said, the standard, like, can you land, which is not really shouldn't be as challenging as it sounds, or it may not be. So you do that, that's completely on the individual person how long that takes, but on average that's about 30 or 40 hours of flying around until the instructor pilots are happy with it, and you also do instruments in that period as well, and then you upgrade to RL2, and that's where we start teaching you mission tasks. So depending on your metal, I'm an air assault pilot, so our metal tasks are in metal mission essential task list is relatively varied. So everything from terrain flight to sling loads, potentially spies and fries, so fast rope stuff, um, multi-ship, all those kind of things. And your commander will select which ones he wants you qualified on for your 2000 series test or your mission tasks. We get you through that. You're allowed to fly with a regular pilot in command doing base tasks. So you can't do mission tasks at RL2 with a regular pilot in command, but you can now fly with a pilot in command to get a little bit of a break from an instructor pilot. Um, and then you upgrade to RL1, and now you are a full mission qualified co-pilot. And we also do that same progression under night vision goggles. So they are separate. So you can be RL1 day, night unaided, but RL3 night vision goggle. So you go through that whole thing. You can kind of do them concurrently, but it generally doesn't work that easily, especially because we have, as you know, in the summer, the sun goes down pretty late. So just getting goggle time period is a challenge. So we try not to put the new guys that are going to take more goggle flight hours in the summer into goggles right away. So we let them get mission ready. RL1 seems to be a better way because they get that mind muscle connection and get a little bit more comfortable. And then we just add the complexity of putting on the night vision goggles and make them scan their head and do all those funny things. So that is supposed to take, and I'm probably going to jack this up. I'm pretty sure active duty, you have to progress from 3 to 2 and 2 to 1 in 90-day intervals. So within 180 days of being designated RL3 leaving flight school, you have to be fully mission qualified. In the Guard, you're given 365 days for each level. So it could take you 2 years. It shouldn't, right? There's some pretty major issues if it takes you 2 years to go from base task to fully mission qualified. So generally, it's been taking about a year on average for pilots coming back from flight school to be fully mission qualified, released to the flight company or the staff, wherever they end up being, to go out and do what they do. So our minimums are 48 hours every 6 months, with goggle minimums and stuff in there if you're goggle qualified. But on average, I've averaged about 250 hours a year in the Guard. So the flight time is there. Yeah, the flight time is there if you're willing to be the guy on the wall, ready to pick up the phone. Hey, somebody dropped out. We need a pilot. Yeah, I'll be there. And then obviously the opportunity to get more reps increases once you become a pilot in command, or an instructor pilot or something where they need it. Right now, we're hurting for instructor pilots. So I've been flying a lot. I did a double yesterday. So got just about 4 hours in the afternoon in a Blackhawk. So that's been pretty consistent. So right now, being an instructor pilot helps because you get a lot of time. But there is flying time in the Guard.
Rich get richer. It's usually how it goes. But
yep, sure does.
Always get get as many qualifications as you can. Make yourself more valuable. So you don't do something if guys come back. Air Force calls it seasoning. Typically, they'll come back from flight school. Depending on your platform, maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's a year, maybe it's longer to get seasoning. They'll put a young wingman on orders for a year, and then hey, that's your full-time job to get through MQT, mission qualification training, which sounds like that's the RLL step progression.
Yeah.
Because during MQT you're flying with an instructor pilot each and every time, and then you're cut loose to go death and destruction.
Yeah.
Try not to kill
anyone. We don't call it seasoning, and it's completely dependent on budget, right? The thing with the Guard, if people aren't familiar, is we are a state entity first. So we're owned by the governor until we're activated. And then we become federal. So our budgets come from a different place than active duty and reserve. So we try to give guys and girls, when they come back from flight school, full-time orders. They are generally not longer than 2 months. And unfortunately, to save money, those are generally 5 5-day orders at a time, so you don't get BAH and all those things.
Classic.
So, yep. So obviously, if you're an adult and you have bills, those people don't stay on those orders for very long because they're only making, $600-700 a week, which
Yeah.
is kind of hard to live. So yeah, they have the opportunity to come in and fly and get abused by the instructor pilots because they're sitting around and it's like, hey, I got some questions for you. You want to talk? Which the answer is always no. But yeah, they don't usually stick around because it's not set up to do that. There are occasionally opportunities to apply for longer term things like the federal technician program. Sometimes they pop up with temp jobs for just a GS-12 pilot, which means that pretty much any pilot can apply. There's no additional duties required or additional skills. And then occasionally they have extra money where they're like, hey, does anybody want to go on full-time orders for 30 days? So, but you can't really rely on that. But we do try to give people the opportunity to fly as much as possible when they first come back from flight school, but it's really hard to keep them there for obvious reasons if we're not giving them those full, over 30-day orders so they get all the benefits of being on an active pay status.
Any integration with state, local agencies? Like, is that routine, or is that like, hey, we got to wait for a natural disaster to happen? I'm sure there's training, but what's that integration like?
So it's basically based on us to go out and find those customers. Some states are better at it than others. For instance, Colorado, where they have our high altitude training course, they have it's called the DISCA mission, and I don't remember what that stands for, but it's basically Department of Defense and state operations together. So using military assets for state means. So they're pulling people off of hiking trails on Pikes Peak and things like that. And they've got a pretty smooth way to cut through the bureaucracy and get that approval, to have civilians on the aircraft and assume that risk. State of Connecticut hasn't quite figured that out yet, but we do a lot of training and a lot of talking. We have had moments where we've gone out. A couple of years ago, we went down for a hurricane. I don't remember what hurricane it was. I think Sandy, down in North Carolina, and helped pull people off of houses and fly around, moved a bunch of stuff, one Chinook, one Blackhawk. But generally stateside here in Connecticut, we haven't had a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of red tape. So for instance, we train Bambi buckets. So water buckets, dropping the water bucket into the water, dropping it on the fire, some basic, academics on how wildfires work and how you should be stemming them. The water bucket's not there to put out the fire; it's to stop its advance, kind of thing. Have you ever flown into Bradley International in Connecticut?
I don't think I have. I've had it as like an alternate.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, I guess probably overflown it.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the only reason I asked is just to the east of Bradley, about 5 miles away, there's a river, Connecticut River, and it's got an island in it. We call it Kings Island. We use it for our departure and arrival corridor sometimes if there's a lot of traffic going into the runways. A couple of years ago, in the middle of the summer, that island, for whatever reason, caught on fire. Fire department from the local town called us and said, hey, can you help us at all? Because it's kind of a pain to cross the river and put out the fire. And we know you guys have this capability. It was a day we were already programmed to fly, like the aircraft were already paid for, crews are already assigned. We could not figure out how to get the approval, even though the aircraft were flying, to attach a bucket to one of them and pick up some water from the river, drop it on an island that's uninhabited 5 miles away from the airport, which is a little disappointing. But so to answer your question without completely torching my state, some states successfully do that, and they do a lot of stuff for the state, and other states struggle with that a little bit. Like I said,
yeah, I mean, there's tons of agencies and hundreds of units. I was thinking maybe again this would be another one for like the Air Force Rescue Center. That's there are a couple of them, but like centralized, and then if they're like even an active duty asset that's obviously tied to that, I feel like they probably have the pipeline. It's already streamlined. They know what the process is like. Hey, there's hikers that have been missing, or there's a boat out in the Gulf, when you go pick someone up, they just have like, they just brief the general, and the general has like the right corridor to DOD to get that signed, that federal entity signed over, you know? So like, unless you're like in that and know how, but I mean, again, you think like common sense wise, can we just like do this? The answer is no. Common sense is not always common, and different pools of money, which, yeah, in the end, like I'm sure if it was threatening the town and stuff, like someone hopefully would just be like, dude, put the bucket on there. We're just going to go do it, and I'll answer for this later. But life, limb, or eyesight type deal.
Yeah, apparently obviously well before my time, but apparently during 9/11, we still had Hueys and D model Chinooks. And I guess pilots just started showing up and flying to New York City, which is completely would be alien to us now. Like the briefing and approval process just to get permission to take the aircraft off, we would have never gotten. But these guys just showed up and went down to help, and they did, help move things around. So it can be done. I think as we get farther along, the risk mitigations and the risk to somebody's career gets higher, and then they decide they don't want to, go down that path.
That's why I'm like, I hold on to hope that, if it's an existential threat or people are dying, that, someone is going to be like, you know what, F it. Like, we can do this. Let's make it happen. I'll answer for it later. That's my hope.
Yeah.
I feel like there's enough people out there that still would be like, do it. And like, I'm not worried.
I'm on the same team. I'm 100% with you.
Yeah, I feel like there's enough out there, because it's easy to get real salty. I'm usually pretty salty about that kind of stuff. You're like, man. But,
yeah. Well, I think I said in my bio that I'm done with the military in December, so I'm trying to temper some of that I'm leaving with not completely shooting myself in the foot. And I do love the organization. It's just you're
gonna be done like
done. Yep, ready to turn over a new leaf. A decade in, and just don't have the motivation to continue that way for another 10 years just to get a pension. So I'm gonna move on at this point. Takes a lot of your time, right? As you know. And my current job, I work 15-13, so I'm on the road for 15 days a month straight. And then I have to come back, and it's like, hey, you got to go to the simulator for the Blackhawk. The simulator is 4 hours away in Pennsylvania, so you're gone all weekend, and it's just, it doesn't buff. And I don't want to not do a flying job in the military. So it was either like transfer to Joint Force Headquarters and be a walking warrant, which I don't think I'm qualified to be, or say thank you and bow out gracefully.
Yeah. Well, before we kind of get to that piece, and the next is like, getting long in the tooth, I want to talk about your OIR deployment. I mean, it's crazy. I look at the dates. So you're there February 23. You're there a year to this year, which is wild too. Because again, I think about it. We have coming up on our 10-year anniversary of going to OIR. So you're like, man, it feels like it was just like yesterday this thing kicked off, and now all of a sudden people are still over there fighting, kicking down doors, and doing stuff every single day. Yeah, it's 10 years since the world first heard about ISIS and all this stuff. So you're like, man, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's constantly changing. So yeah, we left February 7th of 2023. Spent 2 months at Fort Hood, Texas, doing our workup pre-mob. Because obviously they take a bunch of National Guard units and then stick them together. So they figure they got to put you together for a little bit here before they send you overseas, so you can figure out how you work together. But yeah, I landed in Iraq April 18th of last year at the beautiful AAAB, Al-Assad out in Anbar province, and I was scheduled to go to. Yes, it didn't exist until a couple of months ago when the news was talking about it, but Tower 22 out in Jordan on the border of Syria. And the only reason...
Tower 22 made the news, right, they were one of the first rocket attack, or it was like the 2 Georgia reservists that were killed in the attack on Tower 22.
It was the soldiers that were killed, and that's when Tower 22 was publicly known. So as far as I was aware, before that, Tower 22 didn't exist. It was one of those austere bases that it's there, but it's not there. Obviously, if you were looking for it, you could find it on Google Maps, but it wasn't highlighted. Now, I looked the other day. on Apple Maps. It's actually got pins and like where the chow hall is and stuff like that. So that's great. I'm really glad they
Hey,
announced where it is.
yeah, give you these precise GPS coordinates so you can really hone in your
Yeah, your
IDF.
one way yeah, your
Yeah,
one way UAS.
yeah, man, that's a
So
whole nother game. Oof.
yep. So spent like about a week in Al Asad waiting for the aircraft and doing the rip. So the Army does this rip where you start. I don't know if the Air Force does it the same way, but you have a torch, advon, and main body. So torch and advon go ahead of the main body.
Not familiar
A
with
couple,
Torch. Advon, yeah, we do that, but I don't know what
yeah.
Torch is.
Torch is like the first
Guy.
couple of guys that goes out,
Okay.
and it's usually a very small group. So, for instance, our commander was on Torch because he was the first one in country and had to kind of get everything set up, and then Avon was like the instructor pilots and stuff like that. So I show up AAAB, and the unit that we were replacing was on the same schedule we were. So they were at the end of a year, and they're super anxious to like call it a day and get out. Medevac was bringing their own aircraft. The assault, we were falling in on aircraft that were already there. So the aircraft I'm supposed to take, the Tower 22, is already at AAAB, and they're ready to leave. So their platoon commander or their PL is like trying to ask me to sign for the aircraft and just head out. And I don't have ComSec, I don't have anything. And I'm like, first of all, no, I'm a warrant officer. I'm not signing for a helicopter. That's not how this works. I have a commander for a reason. That's why he gets paid the big bucks and he's got the captain bars of the major rank on his chest to assume that risk. I'm not signing for a $20 million helicopter. And I don't have ComSec. I can't talk to anybody. Haven't had an LAO. I don't even know how to get to Tower 22. Like, we're not doing that. So the commander had to get involved, slow things down, and then finally pushed to Tower 22 where we were setting up as the Med Chase. Medevac, for those that don't know, per the Geneva Convention, not that the people that were monitoring or fighting or trying to stop ISIS cares about the Geneva Convention, but we try to follow it. So the medevac aircraft is not allowed to be armed. Um,
Which
so
I didn't know that probably until like the last year of my life. Right now, I'm like,
mhm.
what?
Yep, yes,
Hard nope, thanks. I'm like,
yeah, yeah,
you want
yeah,
me to do what?
yeah. And it's not like we have any of the swoopy things that you guys have on your aircraft to protect yourself, but we at least have a couple machine guns so we can keep people's heads down and at least
Yeah.
haul ass and bypass. But we were there to kind of, I think, what the Air Force would call rescort medevac as we did our missions. Um, so got the Tower 22, got to select my crew, and my crew was completely separated from the rest of our company. So we had people at Erbil or in Erbil, Baghdad, Tower 22, and then PBS, which was in Syria. So kind of spread out, and then we were the outstation.
I assume that's spread out. I mean, obviously limited number of assets, but between Erbil, Tower 22, Syria, that's a lot of ground to cover at 80
Mhm.
knots or 90 knots. So you
We're,
need
we're 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 a little faster than that,
100,
right? We're
120.
120.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah,
don't.
like
Sorry, I don't want to sell
yeah,
you short.
yeah, yeah,
Mach point 21 instead of. Yeah, sorry, I'm
yeah,
sorry. It's,
yeah.
at
When you're
100
that slow,
at
when you're
120
that
knots,
slow, 30 knots makes a
you
difference.
just shaved off 13 minutes on your 4 hour journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, that's well. Okay, that was like one of the issues for when the Jordanian went down when we were out there. Is like, dude, like 4 hours was the earliest a Jolly
Yep.
was going to show up and pick them up, and then that changed the whole structure of where everyone was. So,
Yeah.
blah, not
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. Like I said, I think because of that, the Jolly dudes were at Tower 22 as well. That's where their HHs were based, and then they had other bases further in to Jordan, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Um, but it was interesting. So it was the first time I had done any sort of medevac anything, and there is definitely a difference in doctrine between air assault and medevac and how we fly and fight and how we look at that not I don't think it's a war, but in that conflict and how we go into that conflict. Um, they're more patient orientated, which they should be, right? Because they're going out to save lives, so everything is very quick. You get a priority medevac, you have to be off the ground once it's assigned within 15 minutes, and you're trying to get that patient to the next highest level of care within an hour. Air assault is more deliberate, right? we are doing those Dell ops, and it would take 72 hours of planning and bunch of rehearsing, bunch of briefs, probably too far to the other extreme of that pre-planning and going to the NATS and figuring everything out. So putting those two units together where they're diametrically opposed, like we do everything quick because we have to go out the door now, and we do everything planned, and we try not to rush into things. So getting those things to match was occasionally a challenge. So I actually started going to we were invited to go to the alert brief for the Jolly guys every day. Medevac guys had no interest in going, and as the AMSO, as a weapons officer for the Army, I was like, hey, I'll go over and check it out, and I'm sure they've got some good information. And they fly a really similar aircraft to ours, right? They got a bunch of stuff hanging off of it, and it's painted gray instead of green, but it's the same airframe. And ended up basically, like I said earlier, just being adopted by them and coming and going as I pleased. By the time that they left, because they were only there for 3 month rotations, which I hated them for that.
Join the Air Force.
Yeah, join the Air Force indeed. That's a my bad. But their weapons officer Adis was one of those guys that was orders of magnitude smarter than I am. Like, you just talk to him and you're like, you're on a whole different plane, right? You're like, I don't know how you can even take the time to speak to me, because you're thinking about advanced level calculus, and like in your spare time you're writing code for an app you're developing. Like, who has this much brain space? But quickly identified, like, this guy's got a capability that I don't have. And to his credit, he could have told me to get lost as like the stray Army dude wandering around, but took me under his wing and showed me, in-depth briefs on radar theory, IR theory, why the Air Force flies the formations they do, how they treat those threats, and really help build those pieces. And then the DO as well. We found out we both like Formula One, so I would go over to their theater, because of course they had a theater in an austere location, and that was kind of cool.
Yet again, it's like, join the Air Force.
Yep.
Priorities.
So the DO and I, Bam Bam, had a pretty good relationship, and it became pretty clear quickly, because of the mission that we were doing with the Medevac, there wasn't going to get a lot of time for me to keep my crews trained with the guns, right? We're flying with the guns every day, but we don't have the authority to just go out and pop rounds in the middle of nowhere. Especially depending on who sees that, with TikTok being what it is. You get one guy filming an Army helicopter shooting rounds into the middle of the desert. For all I know, they could Photoshop people into it, make it look like we're shooting at people. So I reached out to Bam Bam and was like, is there any way that we can go do gunnery with you guys? Because my first question was like, where do you shoot? And they were like, Iraq. I'm like, yeah, that's great. Where? They're like, Iraq.
The country of Iraq.
Yep. And I was like, cool. I don't know if I can do that, so that doesn't really help me. And you're familiar with the DCZ?
No.
In the deconfliction zone over ATG in Syria, southeastern Syria. You probably raged through it.
Well, that's going back 10 years, right? So anything to the west, there was a line north-south running, like that was all Assad and assumed Syria. And then you had Darzawar out there in the east, which was Syrian regime held. And so occasionally, like, they would have like little Su-22s or something, like blast out of Darzawar, completely just, blinders on, going back over to the west. So we stayed out of there, and then we would just, if we were coming home empty, just super power through and go supersonic. Nice. So maybe that's the same thing. It wasn't. It might have been called that then. I didn't know. We're just like, this is the superpower lane, and this is, if we have gas and don't need to go to the tanker, this is the way we're going to go home, which is much faster. Shaved off like 30 minutes, and you got a boom rocket, just so America.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, it's probably the same area, but it's just this deconfliction zone over this base that's in Syria, where it's there because there's a main supply route, an MSR, that a lot of drug trafficking goes through, and that's how ISIS funds a lot of what they do and a lot of the militants over there. But that base had a range north of it, so we tried to get this mission approved for me to fly, my crew to fly with a Jolly aircraft into Syria. do calls for fire with the JTAC up there, 5 lines, and then, you know, continue that if it was successful. First time we tried it, we used Army channels, and it immediately got slapped down. Like, you're doing what? No way. Because there are some differences. One of the things that we didn't realize is that there's even just differences in terminology. The Army has reversed how the Air Force does those fence in, fence out calls. So when we come back in to the base, it's fence in. When we go out, it's fence out, which you guys are opposite, right?
Yep.
So when you go in country, it's
time
fence
to get
in, right?
time to get ready.
Yeah.
Fence
so
in. It's game time.
Yeah. So we flipped that in the Army for whatever reason. So one of our risk mitigations when we actually finally did fly together was like, hey, we're not going to say fence in, fence out. We're just going to say fence. And you're going to know which position your switches have to be in based off of where you are in the world. But yeah, we tried to send it up the Army way. Didn't work. Our brigade commander showed up for a show and tell at our base pretty early on, and I went up to him and said, "Hey, so this is what we're trying to do. How would you like to see it? Because you're the approving authority." And I literally got the answer. Sometimes it's easier to do it and ask for forgiveness. It's like, how does that work? Like, you want me to take an aircraft with another entity into Syria, and you're not going to fry me to the wall after that ends? Like, that's not going to be a thing. Dog is going to make too much noise. So pushed it back up, and I was on the official email chain, and Bam Bam had pushed it to his Air Force channels, and it came across. It actually said, "Do we want to use Army or Air Force channels to push this further?" And somebody with a significant amount of rigs said, "Let's use Air Force. We know how the Army channels are going to be." So they pushed it to the Air Force channels, which came down to CJTF, which runs the AO, and it got approved. So kind of forced the hand of our brigade battalion commander, which they weren't super happy with, but they were command directed to do this mission. So we got to take off with Jolly. At that point, they were calling themselves Pedro. I don't know how that works and when they switch and when they decide they're Jolly Green and when they decide they're Pedro. But went into Syria to do this gunnery mission and check in with the JTAC and almost immediately get told to land because there's drones in the area over the ECP. And we sat on the ground at ATG at Fly for about 30 minutes while the JTAC's screaming around in his Razor. We can see F-16s down way lower than they normally are off the cap, looking for something, and they're asking us like, "Hey guys, can you identify drones?" And it's like, yeah, it's kind of hard to do that under low loom and goggles. Like, I can't really tell what I'm looking at. But the entire time, I think my plan was also to do M4 out the door because we fly with our rifles. So I'd taken the doors off, and there's drones. Don't know what kind of drones, whether they're quadcopters or bigger things, one way US. And the only thing I could think about the entire time is like, why did I take the doors off? Like, dude, I'm sitting on the ground.
After seeing all those like Ukrainian like drone videos, or like it's crazy to watch Instagram now reels of you're just seeing like drones chasing dudes around, and you're like, that's absolutely terrifying.
It's very terrifying. And like you said, the Ukrainian things, they've gotten really good at plunking helicopters with quadcopters. And that's a helicopter pilot that sends chills up your spine.
Dude, warfare is changing. I shared it. What was it, Kagan Dunlap? I think he's a Marine. I think he's a Marine warrant officer, big following, but it popped. It was like the largest drone shows in Shenzhen, China. Where they're all amazing drone show, right? You see them all the time. But you're like, weaponize that, like, game over. Now, exploding pagers and exploding walkie-talkies, like, doesn't have to be a massive charge, but like, defend against 8,000 drones. Good luck. I mean, defend against one drone. Good luck. Like, dude.
Yeah. I mean, I think the scariest thing too with these drones is like, they miss, they can re-engage. Like, you didn't do your job just because you got it to miss once. Like, it's still coming back, and that's horrific.
It's got 17 minutes of lithium battery time remaining. That's this most recent one I just saw a couple days ago. Literally is two guys. They're walking through the field or whatever. This drone comes down, and then they're shooting at it, and they definitely don't have a clear avenue of fire. Like one's pointed this way. They're pointing at each other, just trying to shoot. So like the chance of them shooting one another to, it turns out it doesn't end well for the two guys. I don't know if they're Russian or Ukrainian, but like,
Yeah.
the drone's just circling them and missing, trying to hit them. And it's like, the drone's got time and you're out in the open. You got nowhere to go. And if you go dive in a ditch, well,
Yeah.
that's
And
what
all of those things rely on you to visually acquire them. Like there's not much that my helicopter can do to warn me about that early. So I'm reliant on my eyes, the co-pilot's eyes, and the two guys in the back to actually be scanning to see that thing. Because if we don't, we're just hoping that the aircraft is going to eat it and continue to fly, which is not something that you want to put your faith in
yeah,
when things are spinning.
you're not going to see if it's even coming. Maybe it's coming right at you, like a bird, picking up. Like I pick it up a quarter mile before it goes zipping by you. But other than that, you got no chance.
Yeah,
Drones.
I mean, I'm sure you in the big fat jet, you've had the same experience where you've had drones where you've had to report it to ATC, and nobody is ever like expecting that. It's always like you see this thing whiz by, and then there's a conversation of what was that? I think it was a drone.
Yeah.
Like now, imagine that thing with a warhead.
Yeah, dude, not where you want to be. It's landscape's changing. It's changing really fast. Not where you want to be. Random thought. I kind of just think about it. So the Medevac piece. I wonder why, like the Army. So all right, I think they use this dust off, right? Is that the call sign?
Yep. Which is an acronym, but I'm not even going to attempt it because it's a convoluted acronym. It's like something like,
Doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me. Everything's an acronym. It's interesting. Like doctrine wise, Air Force has the Jollies, Combat Search and Rescue. That's ARM platform, essentially doing the same thing. Because it can do obviously a lot of other things, but you got PJs on there. You're going to pick up guys and gals that need to get to the next level of immediate care. Versus like the Army's like, just instead of putting a bullseye on the side of your helicopter, just call yourself Combat Search and Rescue, and then you can arm yourself. It's interesting that I wonder if it is just ingrained in doctrine, and this is the only way we can do it. I mean, it's incredibly noble. Don't get me wrong, but man, if I could take a gun to a gunfight instead of just land and be a bullet magnet, an RPG magnet, it seems like that's what I would want to do.
Well, to your point, even as an air assault platform in the Army, the Jolly guys, they're again same airframe, basic airframe. They're way more heavily armed than we are. From size of caliber to having miniguns. We've got two 7.62 machine guns, and they've got 50 caliber machine guns and miniguns, so they can rage in and actually fight their way in. Whereas ours are like, oh crap, things just went to hell, and I need to keep that gunner's head down and get out of here and call for help from the joint assets. So it's an interesting way to look at the air war in a rotary wing perspective for sure.
This is subjective, but your perspective is like the aviation arm and the aviation in the Army. Is that like a second class citizen? It's like infantry, like, like when you're talking about like flag officers and stuff, I imagine most of the flag officers in the Army are not from an aviation background. They probably come from an infantry. Is that fair? I don't know. Is that my?
No, I think you're completely fair, and it would be a subjective answer. But one of the things that I would say, like even the Army aviation song, right? One of the lines in it is "We support the needs of ground command." Like our song lauding Army aviation is saying we're here to support the ground force commander. And one of the interesting things with working with the Jolly dudes is talking to the PJs, is we were going to try to help them with some of the mission training that they wanted to do, because the Air Force aircraft, the Air Force 60, is generally flying at about 5,000 to 6,000 pounds heavier than we were in a UH. So our capability to go out and do things, at least lift things, and a bunch of heavy, big jack PJ dudes was a little bit higher than the Jolly dudes, and they had their alert that they had to stand on. So when our UH wasn't on med shift, it was just kind of sitting there, right? So we could, and in Jordan, you could fly single ship because it was supposedly a safe country until obviously Tower got plunked. So we were trying to plan missions. And when we were talking to the commander, or when I was talking to the commander of the PJs, he was asking it in a way of like, can we try to do this? Can we try to do that? And I had to tell him like, so the way the Army works is if I'm assigned to you, you are the ground force commander and you run the show. You tell me what you need. And if it's physically impossible, it's my job as the air mission commander to tell you I can't do that. This is how close I can get to your intent, but you run the show. And he was like, yeah, that's completely different than how our relationship is with the Jolly guys because they're the asset and they get us into the fight kind of thing. So it is, the Army is definitely ground force centric. Our job in air assault is to bring as many people and things as close to the X and amass as much combat power on the X. But it's, the Army is there to gain and maintain that land warfare initiative. So we're an enabler for the infantry so that they're in, to break it down in most simple terms is so that they can get to the fight without having to hoof it 18 miles. So instead they're only hoofing it 20 miles. So they're more rested and they're a more effective fighting force when they get there. But we are 100% beholden to the ground force. So those guys are the ones making decisions.
I mean, it does make sense. Like, who's your customer? What's your purpose? I mean, as a seed guy, like you have a customer and you have a role. If you're doing escort, you have a customer and you have a role to play in that where they're more important. But yeah, tell them what you can and can't do, yada yada. But I wonder if it's like that systemically, culturally, like as that goes on and on, then it kind of permeates through the decision making. And dude, you guys don't need. You need 7.62s. You don't need 50 cals. You don't need miniguns. Or like, well, maybe. Make us more capable in supporting you.
Yeah, I mean, you could even make, and I know some people have, you could even make the argument that the A-10 belongs in the Army, doing that CAS mission because it's generally supporting soldiers and Marines that are on the ground, and we should be able to get those assets. And I think it all stems from, in my limited historical experience, I'm certainly not a big brain with this, but I think it all stems from that Florida Key Agreement or the Key West Agreement. I don't remember how it's actually worded in Key West. Where the Air Force separated from the Army and they delineated whose duties are what. And I know there's been a little infighting. I know there's an Army OV-1 pilot that shot down a MiG in Vietnam because he basically went Winchester because the MiG flew in front of him and just launched everything and probably got lucky and came back with a skid mark in his pants. I know for a fact that Robin Olds also acknowledged that the Army guy actually shot down that MiG. So that's a good win for the Army. And the Army didn't acknowledge that until 2007 because they didn't want the Air Force to get mad. But
politics.
Yeah, true story. But I think the couple of times where the Army has pushed that especially with fixed wing assets, where they were trying to find a foothold for Army aviation, the Air Force pushed back. And at one point we had the Caribou, that small twin prop transport. The Army was flying that in Vietnam, and the Air Force was like, you can't do air mobility. That's our job. And the Army was like, where does it say we can't do that? Or can't have this Caribou and move our own soldiers? And my understanding of the story is the Air Force was like, all right, we'll just start doing more helicopter stuff. And the Army was like, whoa, never mind. We're just kidding. Yeah. You can have the Caribou. We'll keep the helicopter stuff. And they actually physically gave the Caribous over to the Air Force. So there's a little bit of a sibling. I guess it's not sibling. It's dad and son. Son is a little smarter than dad, and they're constantly warring over that. And the Army's like, we're just going to focus on the ground side.
Budgets, man. Don't take each other's budgets. That's what's all. I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, as we kind of wrap up here, one, I hope you hang around for a There I Was story. Want to pick your brain a little bit. I definitely, before we part, and if I'm missing anything, I want you to highlight it. But got to hear the story of the cat here. I mean,
yeah. So in Tower 22, and there's a bunch of feral cats, and I'm not a cat person. I'm a dog person. So when I heard that there weren't any dogs there, it was just cats. It's like, cool. I'm not going to get attached to anything. Like, I love animals, but I'm not going to end up with a cat, right? And an animal that I know I can't bring home. So sure enough, I'm sitting on my steps one day, and this cat walks up to me and just kind of looks at me, and it's super skinny. So I give it water, and then I come back from the chow hall and I get a little bit of food. So I give it food, and then it, as cats do when they get fed and get water, it started coming back. So, and it was super friendly. Would jump in my lap and purr, and it's like, oh, this is kind of nice. I feel kind of normal instead of that I'm in the middle of the desert on a deployment. So we all know that General Order Number 1 says, among other things, you're not allowed to have pets while deployed, right? Which I had to actually sign. So I know the rule, right? But it's like, you know, what's it going to hurt? Like, yeah, the cat could have rabies, but it doesn't look like it. It could bite me. Hasn't been. And the cat didn't have any signs of fleas or anything. So I started letting the cat into my room because we had single man wet shoes. So I had the room and a bathroom to myself. Like I didn't have to share it with anybody. It was basically like this little standalone apartment. The only thing it didn't have was a kitchen. So the cat started coming in my room. Never once destroyed anything in my room. Every night at 3 in the morning, it'd wake me up to go out, and it'd disappear until the next day, and then it'd come back at like 8 o'clock, and it'd sleep on my bed, and we'd hang out, watch movies, and purr and all that stuff. So it was a nice way to like have some normalcy. So a couple of weeks go by, and for some reason on this austere base in the middle of Jordan, there's a bunch of MPs. Like they have military police. Like they have nothing else to do. They don't have their car that they usually get assigned because it's not big enough for them to drive around in their Impala. And they've got nothing to do because you're on an austere base. So they're wandering around, and they notice that we're starting. There was a couple of other cats that the Medevac guys were feeding. So there's cats around the aviation section of the base. And they're like, you guys aren't allowed to touch these cats. Like, if we start seeing you interacting with these cats, we're going to have to put them down. It's like, the hell you are. Um, so, so for about a month, I had this cat in my room and would come and go. And I would ask my crew chief who lived across the alleyway from me, like, hey, is it clear if I let this cat out? Because I couldn't get caught aiding and abetting this
Yeah.
cat, basically. So, like I said, I would go over and spend time with the Jolly dudes, and I was talking to the DO Bam Bam one day, and I was explaining. Well, one, I walk into their like hangout area where their theater is, and there's a cat walking around in their area, and I'm like, "You guys don't care?" They're like, "Oh, we don't let the MPs over here. Like, they can't come in this building. Like, that's our cat. Like, it's a cool cat, so it just gets to hang out in our common area." Like, oh, so I kind of use that as a way to judge like can I trust these guys if I tell them that I'm doing something that I know is illegal, doing a little bit of crime? So I tell Bam Bam this, and I had reached out to this company or this rescue called the SPCAI, and they have a program called Patriot Pets, where it's specifically for deployed soldiers or service members, and it's a nonprofit. So basically, it costs a couple of $1,000s to save a cat or a dog from a deployed location and to get it all its paperwork and to the rescuer and then overseas and back home. And all they ask from the service member is $450. So they cover everything except for $450. So I reached out to them, went through the process. They approved me. I named him Fury, which was our call sign. So they approved Fury, and they put me in contact with this British national that lived in Oman, this older woman who was the rescuer. And she was like, I can come pick him up. So I was like, I don't know how to get the cat to you. She's like, I can come pick him up. And it's like, oh, I can't really tell you where I am. And she's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, I am in a place that doesn't exist. I'm like, is there somewhere? So I asked the BDOC, the base defense, kind of like had to kind of dance around why I was asking because I didn't quite trust that infantry major, that he wasn't going to like put me up against the wall.
Yeah.
And I was like, how do I get a visitor on base? And he's like, oh, if they have a cat card, they could just drive right up the gate and come right through. I'm like, what if they don't have a cat card? And he's like, well, there's a Jordanian checkpoint like an hour south of here. She can't get, or the person can't get within an hour of the base. So it's like, great. I've got a helicopter, but I am like the least mobile human being in the world because I don't have access to a vehicle. Like if I did, I could just drive into Jordan and this would be a non-factor, but we don't have our own organic vehicles. So it was the backtrack. I was telling Bam Bam about it and was also saying like the MPs are sniffing around. Like I'm going to lose. I'm going to get in trouble and I'm going to have to watch my cat get shot. And this really sucks. So he was like, I think we can help you. So for like a week, he was trying to figure something out. And then one day the cat didn't come back. And I'm like panicking. And he finally came back and he had like this gray mark across his face, like he had been in a cage and pushed his way out because he's a smart little guy. So I went over to Bam Bam and I was like, hey, I don't have time. Like we need to get him out now. So to his credit, he could have told me to go pound sand and I got bigger fish to fry, but he was like, let me make a call. So he made a call to get a parts run from MSAB where the rescuer could meet the person for parts. Not 100% sure whether they needed or not, kind of immaterial. So this female major and what do you guys call your E9's chief, right?
Yep.
Yeah, this female major and chief drive up, and they weren't told what the plan was. So they drive up, drop the parts off, they're hanging out, and they're gonna leave the next morning. And I go over. Bam Bam tells me to come over, and I'm standing there, and he's like, "Hey, just so you guys know, tomorrow when you go back to MSAD, you're gonna bring this cat to me to rescue her." And the major's like, "I don't really want to do that. It doesn't sound legal." And he's like, "Hey, just to be clear, I'm not asking you. You're gonna do it. This is Alex. It's his cat. He's got all the information. So get the information that you need from him." So the next day we smoked. I got the cat in a little crate that I ordered off of Amazon. Was surprised he didn't try to kill me. He was super bummed, and my co-pilot and I put him in the Medevac ambulance to hide him, and drove him over to the Jolly side, and then transferred him into the parts truck, and they drove him back. And 3 hours later, I got a text from the rescuer. "I have your cat." And then 30 days later, he was on a Royal Jordanian flight from Amman straight to JFK, where he got picked up, and he's lived here ever since. So, and then in addition, we got his brother out the next day, and we also rescued 5 dogs from Syria, where those dogs actually flew on Army aircraft to Erbil, and then we got them out. So we were like an international animal rescue, just doing crime in the background.
Those animals hit the lottery, you know?
Yep.
Escaping that place. Gosh, that's crazy. Didn't know that was didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, well, I guess we proved that Army and Air Force can work successfully together to do things when there's no red tape in the way. So
yeah, leave it at the field grade level and below, and usually you can get things done. You know,
yep.
Run through the flag chain. People will say no. Well, hey, as we wrap up here, what am I missing? What haven't I asked you? You think we should talk about or highlight before we split?
Yeah, I think we've talked about a lot. Sorry, I've gone so long.
That's good. That's what this is for. It's a long form podcast. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing I just want to touch on real quick is how quickly, you've got that experience with OIR as well. It was really easy when we first got there to get complacent because it was kind of quiet. Other than that drone incident with Jolly Guys in Syria, I didn't really have any serious incidents, and then moved over to Baghdad after Fury got out and got to the US. And it was the same thing. It was really easy to get lulled into this sense of security, like, hey, we're just going out of the wire, we fence, we do all those things, and we get the O&I briefs, we get that operations and intelligence, but nothing ever happens. Like we read about it, that these people want to do this militia group wants to do that, and nothing ever happens. And then October 7th hit and completely flipped that on its head, like 180 degrees, where I think the 4 locations that we were stationed got hit. And this isn't like a fact check number, but it's close. Got hit 160 times in 3 months between IDF and one-way drone attacks. So things completely changed almost instantly. And we're in the last third of our deployment, and we had to retool and make sure everybody got their heads back in the game and got back into this, like, hey, it's no longer something won't happen when I fly over the wire. Like, it very, very, very much could when we go out. So don't take anything for granted. So that was the big change. Like, first 6 months were pretty chill. We're rescuing animals, having a good time. And then the last 3 months were like, oh, this is combat now. Let's drill down and make sure we get everybody home. And then, we had some close calls, but we successfully got everybody home. So that's all that matters.
I didn't think about, obviously you saw the news after October 7th with the various IDF attacks, rocket attacks, drone attacks, obviously Tower 22. That's when that popped up on the map.
Yep.
Crazy. And I think that's one of the things too, is like, when I first got into the Air Force, man, I wanted to deploy and go do something. And then I got like the war is over. Like, turns out never the case. And it's always going to be there. Conflict's always going to be there. Maybe there's little lulls, but I think never being complacent, always ready especially in a combat zone, if you will. But I can absolutely see, like, just kind of droning on. It's quiet, but never be complacent, man. It'll come back and bite you for sure.
Yep. Enemy always gets a vote.
100%. Malibu, man, thanks for joining me. I look forward to hang around, and we'll do a There I Was segment. So, dude, it was good chatting with you, and we got to do this again. Got to do a bro chat at some point, too. Got to twist Vader and Bender's arm to stop flying as
Yeah,
much. It's really
yeah,
yeah.
you'll enjoy. I hear you're going to be talking to Muttley soon. You'll enjoy that. He's a funny character. He is his call sign, which is that old cartoon dog from Hanna Barbera that messed with people and just laughed his butt off. So he's a good time. So yeah, we got to get the bro chat going for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. Talk to you here in a
Yeah,
second.
thank you. Yep.